rebuild it. Now, I'm going to say that yesterday I was delighted to be able to host an interview with Scott Ritter and a very influential and knowledgeable former Major General in the Indian Army, General Bakshi. And this whole discussion was prompted on the back of the damage, really, that the West's clamour for long-range weapons to be given to Ukraine has caused. There are many people, I will say, off stage at the moment who are desperately worried that the war in Ukraine is about to be ramped up on a scale we can't even imagine by the West providing those long-range weapons to Ukraine. And it was on that basis that I was asked if I'd host a discussion with Scott Ritter and the General to talk about the situation in Ukraine. Now, I want to start straight away with one of the key subjects never talked about in the West, and that is the casualty figures. So here we have the Kyiv Independent. Where are the figures? Well, let's see if we can highlight those for you. General Staff, Russia has lost 643,750 troops in Ukraine since February the 24th, 2022. And this number includes 1,330 casualties Russian forces have suffered just over the past day. So nothing about Ukrainian casualties, but this is the claim about Russian casualties. And if we follow through, we can have a look at another newspaper, which is fully supportive, of course, of Ukraine, the Kyiv Post. Where are the figures? Well, let's bring them up on screen for you. Let's bring them center. And here is that magic figure of 643,750 casualties for the Russians. Now, I'll bring on this clip. It's very slow to play. I'll have to talk it through. It's a Ministry of Defense, a little bit of propaganda video. So I'm going to talk over it, but it says the war in Ukraine has been a costly endeavour for Russia in terms of military personnel, and there's some little cartoon men on screen. And it says that since the start of the conflict, Russia has slightly suffered over 610 casualties, killed and wounded. And it then blames Russia's mass infantry tactics, which require a constant flow of conscripts to the front. It says that military personnel payments represent 8% of federal spending, and it says the human and economic costs continue to mount. But not to worry, because UK, the Ministry of Defence, and the world is standing with Ukraine. Now, interestingly enough, the BBC a few days ago had this article where it said that volunteers were dying as Russia's war dead tops 70,000. Now, I actually discussed this figure with Scott Ritter in the interview. His estimate for Russian casualties was 100,000 dead. That was actually a minimum figure, but he said, I believe it's around 100,000. And if we put some injured figures on that, using a ratio of 3 or 5 to 1, we're up at 300 to 500,000, 500,000 men injured. That's just for Russia. But of course, if we look at the Ukrainian war casualties, then basically we'd be looking at 400 to 500,000 dead, because it's been clear that Russia has outgunned and outfought the Ukrainians to date, and therefore the Ukrainian casualties would be higher. And this means that we could be looking at well over 1 million, possibly over 2 million injured in Ukraine. And I'm going to say to the audience, these horrific figures, which the BBC and the West simply don't talk about, are modest efforts of the carnage. And then we've got to remember, of course, that this is West's proxy war, which the West is going to fight until the last Ukrainian. Now, the BBC, does it get worse? Of course it does. This has just come out from the BBC, a gloating, pathetic little article that it's checkmate for Russia as the global chess organization has instituted a ban because the Russians haven't been behaving themselves. So we've got this slaughter in the West proxy war for regime change in Russia, and the best that the BBC can do is gloat about an international chess tournament. But this is the quality of of the reporters. It's Will Vernon. He says he's currently in London, but usually based in Warsaw, Poland. If you have a look at the text, he will be talking about his award-winning journalism. Personally, I think this is just outrageous. Certainly it can't be called award-winning journalism, but he's one of the BBC multi-billion-pound team, of course, that dare not talk about the slaughter of Ukrainians in this horrific war. So where does that take us? Well, we've been getting some very interesting information from Ukraine. And one of the things that has been pointed out to us is that in Ukraine, there are millions of what are called the unheard voices. These are people who don't want Russia, but they also do not want NATO or the European Union for that matter. They just want to be Ukrainians and they want to be left alone. So I'm going to say we're going to do our best to engage with these people and to see whether we can bring some dedicated reports from people within Ukraine who are trying to speak out. But of course, this is a very difficult thing to do. We'll see what can be done.